Well, so good evening here in Queensland, Australia, and it's a good morning to our UK host, Andrena Forrest. And for our friends across the ditch in New Zealand, obviously it's 10 o'clock at night. It's 9 o'clock in the UK. And as a result, I'll pass you over to Andrena because she's stumbled across
for our friends across
Mark Harris.
New Zealand.
Yep.
It's 10 o'clock at night.
So I'm trying to turn my phone off. Right. Oh gosh. Right. Good morning, everybody, and hello and welcome wherever you are in the world, or if you're listening into the replay. I'd like to say good morning to Yvonne in Adelaide, and I would also like one of our regulars, Healy in Mullumbimby, is in ICU in Australia, very sick at the moment. So if we could send her some lovely healing thoughts for her recovery. Thank you for all my lovely healing thoughts for myself, because I am making good progress. Anyway, today we have Mark Harris, who I met at a healing festival last July, and I was in agony with my hip. I could hardly walk, and came across Mark, and he was offering, I think it was 20-minute sessions just to talk about what was going on. Anyway, we had a talk. He had me on the couch, he had me by the feet, and he's swinging me like this. I can't remember what was going on, the trauma that was trapped in my hip at the time, but anyway, he addressed that, and I could recall the trauma. And anyway, then my sister went and had a session, and my friend, and we were all, well, it sorted out my hip. My hip was so much better. And then we'd taken Mark's details, and eventually over a period of time we got to see Mark again, and he came to us in Glastonbury, and there was 4 of us, and we all had sessions. And I have to say, I really like how Mark works, and he's made such a difference to my hip, because I was literally in agony. And anyway, I'm hip hooray now, and I just have a little bit of a twinge now and again, but nothing compared to how I was suffering. Mark has many strings to his bow. He does so many things well, we've booked him to do a workshop next month. So I will hand the microphone over to you, Mark.
Right.
If you'd love to share how you've got into, I know you've had a military background and all sorts, and all the steps that have led you to all these different things that you're doing in now. So over to you.
Thank you, Andrena, and hello to everybody wherever you are in the world. It's a very sunny morning here in the Brecon Beacons in South Wales. So I'm looking out the window at the little waterfall comes down the garden, lovely blue sky. The dogs are about to go out for a walk, and the cat is letting me know that she needs to have some food. How have I ended up doing what I'm doing? The short version is I describe it as a life in 2 halves. So I'm 58, and the first half of my life from 16 was being in the British Army, and then working for Devon and Cornwall Police, first as what they call a civilian communication officer. So my job was answering 999 telephone calls, people in urgent panic and fear, directing police vehicles where they needed to go. In those days, before the highway agency existed, I was the kind of person that answered a breakdown call if your car broke down on the motorway in the UK. So I would see where you were on the motorway, pick up the phone, pick up the details, write it out by hand, and then fax it. There's an amazing idea. Faxing things to the RAC and the AA, and getting breakdown recovery and police vehicles to the scene. And from that, I moved into uniform service as a constable, and I did all the usual attachments, like traffic attachment and CID and community policing, schools liaison. And at some point on that journey, I realised between the army and the police, I kept getting injured. Not enough to hospitalise me for any lengthy period of time, but enough to kind of let me know that maybe I'm just not doing the right thing here. I used to get a bit sort of hacked off with it. And eventually I decided to leave the police career. Everybody says that's silly, it's a career, it's a pension, all the usual stuff. And I'm going, yeah, but this is, I feel like a square peg in a round hole. The best way to describe it, my army and my police time, was I was exceptionally good at what I did, and I hated every single minute of it. It was like I just did not fit into the structure, the organizations, the ethos, the culture. There was everything about it that just I did not feel comfortable with in any way, shape or form. And at that point, I resigned, I left, I moved from the south of England up to the north of Scotland. And
he's just left us. He did say that where he is at Beacon. No, he did say that in the Welsh borders there, isn't he? So
that's funny, him talking about start of his career, because when I started mine, I worked in the telephone exchange, and I used to answer the emergency calls as well. So that took me back. We used to use, in my next job in communication, we used a fax machine. Right, so...
Well, fax machines, telex machines, yeah, they're all there, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, you know, most people wouldn't even know what that was unless you're the older brigade.
So anyway, here he comes. He's back in. There you go. So there is Wales does have an internet. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. It's the pigeons flying by. So having moved to Scotland, I had a go at living the life. I was renting a cottage on the edge of a huge mountainous area. I was walking into the woods every day, cutting my own wood, doing all manner of part-time jobs, driving lorries, whatever it was, anything to make money, but just make life a bit simpler along the way. And whilst I was doing this, I got a bit into photography. I did a bit of work as a mountain guide, a hill guide. I had a qualification in taking people out of doors. So I spent quite a few years, especially the summer season, taking people out of doors. And one of my jobs was taking people to film locations. People would be going, oh, where was Local Hero filmed? Where was Braveheart filmed? And all these kinds of things. And I would take people to some of the scenes that were filmed up in the Highlands. So they could see where it was out on the Isle of Skye. And I started carrying a camera. And I began to take quite a lot of pictures. And I had no training in photography, but I realised I took some quite good pictures because I was out and about at times of day and times of night when other people maybe weren't. And I started a little photography business and began to sell pictures. And one day I was with my partner at the time, and I was taking pictures in a wooded area at the back of what was a community more than a school. She knew the wife of the deputy head there. And I came back, I saw this outdoor equipment, and I came back, and over lunch I said, I used to work with all that stuff in the army, and when I was an instructor with the Army Cadet Force. And he went, well, that's really interesting, because we've been looking for someone to maybe take this on. And the next thing I know, I've been interviewed and recruited, and I'm now working as an unqualified social worker, what they call a house parent, at a residential school for emotionally behaviour disturbed young people aged between 10 and 17. And my job was to engage them in outdoor activities, and sometimes it was just engagement to get them out of doors, get them doing physical things, and other times they were very much based on trust activities. And as part of this, I had a choice of undertaking a qualification in social work or attending the local college, which was connected to the University of Stirling, and I could do an HND in social sciences, and I decided to do the HND in social sciences. My little joke with my friends and family was that I used to go to the college and the university and do the theory, and then I used to go to the school when I would see everything in practice. So I had to do things like developmental psychology, philosophy, social policy, social history were some of the subjects that we did. And I could go to the school and see all of the different things going on. And I began to develop a particular way of working, and one of the I didn't know this at the time. This was told to me many years later. But on one particular evening, I had about 20 of these very sort of fragmented, very disorganised young people, and I'd taken them to this place called the Den, which was this big outdoor play area. And for about 2 hours, as the sun was setting it into the darkness, I'm quite successfully managing, without thinking about it, I'm quite happily managing 20 of these young people. And eventually we go back up to the main school at 9 o'clock at night, because it's residential. It's now time for cocoa and supper and start the bedtime routine. And I find some of the staff up there not quite panicking, but very, very concerned about where have half of the school gone, and there's only one member of staff with them. And they were absolutely amazed that I had managed to hold these to 20 kids. And I said, well, basically, we went and played. And I realized I was playing. It was almost like we were a gang, and I was like the leader of the gang. And I realized that partway through. And that was my first step in really reflecting upon what I did and why I did it, and maybe where I didn't fit in. That was the first time I really reflected upon that. Most people sort of think about their day or their week, or they make decisions based upon how the day has gone, what I call kind of the Trustpilot view, the Which magazine view of the world, which is you speak to someone and they recommend it and you go, well, that must be good, so I'll try that, I'll buy this, I'll go there. But I began to reflect upon, why I did what I did, why I reacted the way that I reacted. And I realized that some of the children in the school were almost like mirrors to me. And I thought, that's a bit interesting. So that was that phase. And while I was at the school, I developed, I'd always had an interest in first aid. And I began to do some work for the British Red Cross in Inverness as a volunteer. And very soon I found myself being streamed on specialist courses. It was dovetailing into my military stuff about first aid being applied in remote situations, which many people in Australia will be very familiar with, no doubt, and in New Zealand and other places, the greater ranges of the world. It's where you don't have immediate help. You can't just call up and an ambulance turns up in 8 or 11 minutes. So you have to do the basics very well. You don't have to know an awful lot, but you have to do the basics well. I began to move into that. And as a result, I set up my own little training company. And as a result of that, I began to subcontract to the Red Cross. I began to run courses at the school. And eventually I left my job at the school and I was running this company. And that's what then took me full time into the British Red Cross as a commercial training manager. I had the largest area in the UK. I had the whole of the Highland and Islands, except for Shetland and Orkney. That was all of my patch. So Harris and Lewis, all these islands out on the west coast. And I had the least head of population in the UK. And I was the guy that was responsible for all of the health and safety and commercial training in that part of the UK. And from that, I went on a kind of promotion. And I came all the way back to the south of England to Bristol. Where I was then responsible for the counties of Wiltshire, Avon and Gloucestershire and the city of Bristol. That was a completely different ball game. The number of people, the infrastructure, the pluses and minuses of lots of infrastructure, but it's really hard to get around when you're driving on the A4 trying to get to places. At this point, the Red Cross decided they were going to centralise stuff in Manchester. I thought, that's not for me. And it was kind of in between the Scotland and the move to Bristol that I had this absolutely unbelievably huge motorcycle accident. And that involved me. I was travelling fairly late at night, about 10 o'clock at night, between Glasgow and Edinburgh, a very heavy laden motorcycle, actually moving stuff from Scotland to England as part of my move. And I decided to travel overnight because I knew the roads would be a bit emptier, and that meant I could sort of fly along on the bike a bit faster than normal. And I just filled up with fuel at a service station. I pulled back out onto the motorway, and the people who know me well. They know I was pretty much flying along. I was doing just under 100 miles an hour, which anybody in the UK listening will know that's quite unlawful. But the road was empty. I was absolutely flying along, and I had 3 lanes to myself. And effectively, it was like the front end of the bike suddenly sagged. And I thought, whoa, that's a tyre gone. And you go into a thing called a tank slapper, where the fuel on board the bike has taken control. And the bike I was literally using all 3 lanes to try and control the bike. And your legs are kind of flying off the pegs, and you mustn't hang on to the brakes or anything. You're trying to decelerate. I've had things like this before, but not at this speed. And I'm just congratulating myself that I've recovered control of the bike, and I'm now that this kind of violent moving backwards and forwards is turning into this long sedate weave. And all of a sudden, the handlebars came back round, and I just got flipped off the front of the bike while I was in the fast lane. And I think I was down to around about 60 miles an hour at this point in time. And I went over the handlebars, and I remember seeing the night sky, and then seeing the ground, and then seeing the night sky, and then this huge, huge blow to my head. And I literally saw stars. It was like seeing colors. And then the next thing was, I realized I'm sliding across the road. There was some traffic, and I slid between two vehicles at different points on the lane. I saw my bike go past me, and I remember thinking, oh, geez, this is going to hurt. And literally, I then had a second blow to the head as I went straight up the back end of the bike. And at that point in time, it was quite bizarre. I describe it as like being in a hang glider. So there was no sensation of, you know, tunnels of white light or angels, but I'm up in the air, and I was looking at me on the road, and I was talking and thinking exactly as I'm talking and thinking.
Looks like he's going again.
Well, that's quite a journey, eh? To be going that fast on a bike and, seeing the stars and, yeah, gosh.
I mean, we've done 100 miles an hour with a guy called
yeah.
Bill Harris.
So I'm just checking.
There he is.
Andrena, are we still there?
Yeah.
We've got a voice. You might have had frozen, but we can hear your audio. Yeah. Mark, you there? Yeah. There you go.
That's okay, so a little bit of buffering going on there, the wonders of modern technology. Yeah, so I was literally up in the air. And what I mean I'm up in the air, it was like being on a microlight or a hang glider, because I was gradually getting this huge view of the land. Even though it was dark, it was like I'm looking down. It was like I was in a plane. And I'm looking down, but I realize I'm gradually moving further up. And my view of the world is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm gradually, me and the remains of the bike are just like a little dot on the hard shoulder on the edge of the road. I can see the cars going through. I can see all the wreckage from the bike. I can see where all my personal possessions that have been strapped in great big panniers, tank bag, they're scattered all over the road, and vehicles driving through it. And as I was going up, I had this sudden thought, and it was almost like there was this... I'd been separated for many, many years from my first wife, who had my family with, my children. And as I was floating up, I remember thinking it'd be really sad for my kids to grow up and, just not have a dad around should they want to come and see me. And at that point, I stopped going up. And there was this time I'm kind of like hanging, just waiting, and I'm looking down, and I'm rotating around like I'm in a parachute, and I'm just getting this 360-degree view of the world. But I'm now thinking. And the next thing was, I had this overwhelming sensation that there was something that I had come to do. And it wasn't necessarily anything sensational or spectacular, but what mattered was I hadn't done it. I'd arrived, I'd come to do something, and I had not done what I was supposed to have done. In this moment, I have this sudden realization that my whole life has been a distraction, that I've got so tied up in the physical world and all of its nuances and all of its petty matters that we think matter, and actually maybe they don't matter as much as what we think, or maybe they don't matter at all. And at the moment I thought that, it was like I was coming back down in a lift, and it was so tangible. I remember thinking I was going to hit the road again, and it was going to hurt. And I remember trying to shut my eyes. And the next thing that happened was I thought I was having a dream. And I remember lying on something and thinking, cool, the bed is really hard tonight. What an uncomfortable bed. I'm not sure where I am, but this bed is absolutely terrible. I think we're just buffering there again, is it?
No,
yeah. And at this point, I physically open my eyes, and I'm aware of lots and lots of colours. And as my vision came back, I realised the colours are all the lights on the dashboard of the bike, all the electronics. Every warning light is showing, and I'm looking, my head is turned, and I'm looking towards bike city lights. And then I smelt the petrol, and I realized that the tank on the bike was completely ripped open, and because the tank had been full, and there was petrol pumping absolutely everywhere, because the electronic pump was still working on the bike, and I was absolutely drenched with petrol from head to foot. And at this point, all the kind of military, police, first aid, it just kicked in. And I moved myself away from the bike. I kept my head still in a particular position it was in. I thought I need to keep my head still till I've assessed myself. And having moved away from the bike, I'm now sitting on the grass verge. And the first thing was, could I taste blood in my mouth? And the second thing was, when my fingers and toes moving, the toes were very, very stiff and clunky. It's like they were there, but I couldn't feel them properly. And then I remember the first time I was a bit scared was when I thought, well, I better look at my hands. I was expecting my hands to be a bit of a mess, but I lifted them up, and these massive, great big sporting gloves I was wearing, they were pretty much shredded, but they'd done their job. So the gloves come off, and the next thing is you bring your head to a neutral position, central position. And at this point, I then say, right, I need to breathe. So very carefully remove the safety helmet, correct procedure for a potential neck spinal injury. Now I can breathe. I look at the helmet, and it was what they call a Gold Star racing helmet, sort of a carbon Kevlar fiber helmet. And the side that my face had gone along the ground, it was nearly sheared off. And I was looking at this thinking, geez, it's like, I am so lucky at this point. Someone is really looking after me. And then the series of really bizarre things happen. I realize, several vehicles are going through, nobody is stopping. And I think in those days, it was just a simple old, little Nokia mobile phone. That was the cutting edge of technology. And I think I'm going to have to make my own phone call. So I end up very carefully standing up, and then I'm walking up the hard shoulder, and I realize that it was like being drunk. If I wanted to take a step, I had to really take a deep breath. I had to literally look at my legs and make them move, like a conscious effort. So I knew there was a problem. Find the piece of equipment where the phone was. I pick up the phone, and I phone for an ambulance and have a bit of an interesting discussion with the dispatcher, because I'm going, I think I've just had a big accident on the motorway. They thought I was drunk, and I'm going, no, I'm not drunk. I have seriously had this really big accident. So we get an ambulance on. Then I phone the police and tell them the same thing. And then I sat down again, and then there's a little bit of a blank, a little bit of a gap. And the next thing I remember, there was a car had pulled up in front of me, and there was an elderly couple got out of the car, and they looked absolutely terrible, and I become concerned for them. And I'm saying, are you okay? And they're saying, are you okay? And I said, yeah, I've just had that big crash back there if you've just driven through it, with the stuff all over the motorway. And the woman comes up, and I can't do Scots accents, but she had a very, very, very broad Glaswegian accent, which is awesome. She says, I want to give you a hug. She says, but I'm afraid it might break you. And that was the first time that I had a little bit of a wobble, and I had a few little tears at that point in time. It was like, oh, someone's now looking after me. And the guy was in front of me, and he says, what do we do? And all I could think of saying was, I said, look, if I become unconscious, you've got to lie me on my side in something called a recovery position. You've got to keep my airway clear. And the guy says, what's that? And I said, it's like a child asleep in bed on their side. That's what came to me. It's like a child asleep in bed on their side. I said, you must lie me on my side, and please try and keep my nose in line with the center of my chest. I said, you've got to try and keep my head and my neck still. And he says, I work in a laundrette. I've got all these bed sheets in the back of the car. So he goes and gets the bed sheet, and he puts this absolute, I trained, and I put so many collars on people in my time, and trained and done it in so many times in very realistic situations. And he put this really good bed sheet on. It was so good. When the ambulance turned up, they left it on. And the next thing was, there's a Scots traffic policeman is now kneeling down, and he's got his yellow viz jacket, he's got his white peaked cap on and all the rest of it. And he's looking at me, and he went, effing hell. He says, have you just walked away from that? And I went, yeah. I said, that's my accident. And with that, the ambulance pulled up, and the crew get out, this double crewed ambulance, a paramedic, medical technician, and they begin to assess me, and I'm answering questions to the medical technician, and she looks at me and says, I wish all my patients were like this, could answer questions like this. She says, you seem to know what you're talking about. And I said, oh, well, I've worked for the Red Cross, I've been in the military. She says, oh, we'll let you off that one then. And so they have to take the gloves, they have to take the crash helmet, the protective helmet, that has to go to the hospital with me. And the first time that I realized that I was possibly in quite serious trouble in this world was I knew what they were going to do. I thought they're going to put me on a spinal board, they're going to check what this guy's put around my neck. And as they got me on the spinal board and they went to tip it, to lift it, to put it onto the trolley stretcher to then get me on the ambulance, they lifted me very slightly, feet up, head down. And at that point, I went numb from the top lip down, completely and totally. And I must have made some kind of noise or movement, because I saw the paramedics say, quick, quick, put him down, put him down, put him down. And they put me flat on the ground. What happened? I told them. And at that point, it all happened slowly. So you got the two medical guys from the ambulance, you got the police officer, you got the guy from the car. They're all working together. Clearly, two of them have never met before. And they get me back on the ambulance, and we're now going down the road, and I'm talking to the medical technician, and she's looking at the safety helmet, looking at the gloves, making notes about what they call the mechanism of injury, where the energy's gone through the body, where the problems might be. And I realise that the way I am, I'm looking out the back windows of the ambulance, and I can see this flashing lights behind us. And I knew from my police days, and I knew from the speed we were going, that we were going incredibly, incredibly slowly. And I said, we're doing slow speed, head, neck, spine injury. And she says, oh, don't worry about that. I said, look, I've done this for a job. I know what we're doing here. She went, yes, we are. So we're literally doing about 20 miles an hour. Okay, so we're crawling along. We've got a police escort behind us. We arrived at Livingston Hospital. This was quite important for what happened many years later when I started training in various therapies as a result of the bike accident. So we arrived at Livingston Hospital in the central belt of Midlothian. And I remember seeing the time on the wall on the clock as we went in to the accident and emergency, and it was about 1:05 in the morning. We went in, and you get the crash team around you, and I was fully conscious. Everybody's working on me, and they're talking over me, and I'm going, this is terrible patient care. Talk to the patient, ask me some questions. I can help you with this. But they're doing their thing, and at one point, I got two guys, and I was wearing a lot of heavy-duty motorcycle kit. So I've got full set of leathers on, zipped at the back. I've got a spinal protector. Over the top, I've got another great big single oversuit with all sorts of armor protectors in it. And in fact, they're trying to cut this off. And I'm trying to tell them that this is zipped together at the back. And I've got a big spinal protector on. And I hear one person say to the other, why can't we roll him to undo this? And this other guy says, if we roll him now, we might kill him. I remember thinking, I really didn't need to hear that. Right? And so part of me was, this is it. One part of me felt scared. Another part is like reviewing the situation, and it's going, this is absolutely terrible. This is terrible patient care. I've got to talk to your supervisor. You don't say things like this over your casualty when they're conscious. It's very, very, and all this then becomes apparent later on as to why my brain, why I'm processing information like this. Many years later, I come to understand, and this is now part of what I do. And effectively, they then decide that I'm in too bad a state to take me to X-ray or to go and get a CT scan. They can't do it. So they bring a handheld X-ray scanner up to the crash unit, and they're trying to clear my C-spine. That's their most important thing. They're worried about internal injuries. They want to clear the C-spine. So they have 3 attempts to X-ray through my mouth, the C-spine. And that was really quite bizarre, quite unpleasant. They pumped some painkillers into me at this point, and I'm trying to talk, and my mouth's not working properly. This time, it really does feel like I'm completely drunk. And then there's a bit of a gap, and then I wake up, and I'm in the IT unit, the intensive care unit, and I'm sort of half sitting up with a board on, all sorts of tubes and oxygen, and there's a nurse there making various notes, and she says, unit doctor wants to speak to you. And this is about 5 o'clock in the morning now. I've obviously been out for the count for a while. And this doctor comes up, and he looked like Dr. Death. He'd clearly been on duty for an awful lot of hours. And I'm looking at him thinking, you look terrible. And he looks at me and says, you look terrible. So I'm trying to figure out which of the two of us is probably worse off, him with his awful hours or me because of what's happened. And he just says, I've come to see the luckiest man alive. I remember those words. They're absolutely blazed in my brain. And I'm sitting there looking at him saying, I don't see what's lucky about this. And at the time, I was at the end of a relationship. I've crashed my bike, which is my only mode of transport. And now I'm thinking, I've probably lost my job because at least I'm going to be off for a long, long time on sick pay. So I'm not going to get full money. So my brain's on this kind of program. And he says, no. And he says, do you understand what's happened to you? He says, we backtracked and the police have got your bike and they found a Slater's nail in your front tyre. He says, you've had two things happen that are statistically possible, but theoretically shouldn't happen. And I said, well, what's that? He says, well, the Slater's nail's gone into this tubeless tire. He says, and you had a high-speed deflation. And I'm going, well, that's the first. That's when I think the bike sags. He says, and then the tires come off the rim of the wheel. He says, that shouldn't happen on a modern sports bike and a modern sports tire. They're a possibility, but the way the tire is built, and that happen. He says, they both happen to you. And then he says, you've hit your head so hard twice. He says, and we've looked at the damage. He says, and you just shouldn't be here. He says, you know, I see people worse off just falling off a curb, let alone what's happened to you. And he stood up and he looked at me. He says, you've clearly got something you're supposed to do with your life. I suggest you get on with it. We'll be discharging you once it's paid off. And that was the scariest thing of the whole night, was this person, this doctor, saying these words. And I'm thinking, gee, what do you mean? You know, what do you mean? So, okay, I'm lucky to survive. And my arm and legs were really, really stiff. The next thing that happens is my best mate comes down from the north of Scotland. He walks into the IT unit. He's got 2 Magnum ice creams, and he says, which one do you want, mate? Sort of thing. Do you want the strawberry one? Do you want the mint one? And that was my arrival back in, you know, normal reality. My great jokey mate who worked in the oil industry, I just said goodbye to because I was moving to the south of England. And now I find myself back in his house. And that's this incident all sort of packaged up. And I didn't go off and become a Buddhist or go and decide I've got to go and live in an ashram or anything at all like that. I just put this experience in this little box. And I thought, I need to remember this because there's clearly way more to me in life, which I'd always suspected. I'd always suspected that, but I just need to put this in a little box and just get on with a grounded life. So I found myself back at work in Bristol, all sorts of special stuff in place because I couldn't move around properly. I had a huge amount of soft tissue damage, a huge amount of compression in my spine, lots of neck problems, lots of headaches. But essentially, from modern medicine's point of view, there was no need for me to be in hospital at that point. Lots of physio, which helped a bit. And then it was almost like you get discharged and away you go. You're no longer... The hospital no longer needs to have you on their books, so to speak, as a current patient. And I went back to riding motorbikes. My therapy was to buy the bike back from the insurance company that was absolutely trashed. And over an entire winter, I rebuilt the bike. I bought all the bits. And the first time I rode that bike again, it was 8 months after the accident. It was the following year. And I rode the bike for its annual, what we call an MOT in the UK. And having done that, I thought, right, I'm now going to sell the bike up front, go to a dealer, and show them all the paperwork, show them the fact's going to write off. And I sold the bike, and I bought myself another bike, the bike I'd always wanted. But I realised I was a little bit tentative riding it. So I go and enrol on a police riding scheme, and I find myself talking to people whose job I used to do many years previously. And we're out one day. I'm on a one-to-one with a police rider, and I do an overtaking maneuver, and I pull back in, and he pulls up behind me, and I say, how was that? And he says, you're a really good bike rider, mate. He says, don't let the accident put you off. He says, you actually just need to just be a bit more grounded with the riding. So I go back to riding motorbikes. I rode bikes across Europe. I did come off again several times, but nothing on that scale. But as time went by, I began to get this stiffness back in my hands. I began to get this stiffness in my neck. I used to do a lot of rock climbing. I couldn't rock climb anymore because I'd lost all the pinch and pull power in this hand. So I'd taken up paddle sports instead. But I could never hold a paddle properly in this hand. Lots of things didn't work properly with this hand. And eventually, I'm running my own big training company, and I'm in London, and I'm teaching people how to teach. And I'm going to take a little break in a moment and allow Andrena to ask some questions. But this is the tipping point to what I do now. So I've got this history of the army, the police, working as an outdoor instructor, working with these kids in the school, running my own business, which is quite stressful. Very successful, but very stressful. Working for the Red Cross, successful, but stressful. This big bike accident, partway through the Red Cross period. Now I'm lecturing in colleges. I've learned how to teach. I'm primarily teaching first aid, health and safety, but also the things I learned on my HND. So I'm teaching how to teach. I'm teaching psychology. I'm teaching philosophy and social studies. and life skills in colleges. And so I go everywhere on my motorbike, and I got this stiffness setting in. And there I am in London. And I'm running a 5-day basic teaching how to teach course for people who want to teach things like bushcraft and survival and outdoor first aid, remote and first aid. That's the context. And I'm on day 3. It's very hot. I was hydrated. I had plenty of food inside me. And afternoon break, I go to stand up, and my legs were a little bit sluggish. And I looked at the people in the room, and I suddenly couldn't remember anything. My mind was completely blank. And I'm looking at these people thinking, who are you? And I'm thinking, who am I? And I'm looking around the room going, where am I? And so this is like having a seizure. This is like having an aneurysm, a small stroke, all these kind of things. But I was fully aware. I knew I was in the room. I knew I was breathing. Everything's working fine, except I don't know who I am and what I'm doing. And I look down, and I see all my teaching lesson plans and notes, and I see this handwriting, and I go, whose writing is that? And eventually, by just staring at the writing, I gradually begin to recognize my writing. Then I remember who I am. Then I remember why I'm in the room. And I say to the people, ever so sorry about that, little bit of a moment. So we carry on. But at the end of the week, I thought I ought to go and get this checked out. So I drive from London to the West Country, where I go and see my parents. Then I'm driving to Gloucestershire. So quite a lot of driving involved, but I'm driving very carefully now. I'm really paying attention. I've not got the radio on. And in those days, I would have had the mobile phone in the car. I haven't got the mobile on or anything like that. I'm concentrating on the driving as though I'm learning to drive, and I'm driving much slower than normal. I go and teach in a college. I'm actually teaching a basic health and safety course. And on the last day of the course, I've been sitting on a table. I go to stand up, my legs don't move, and I just fell over on the floor. It was almost like that crash. And I'm on the floor, and the people in the room are going, are you okay? And I'm going, yeah, I think I'm okay. I'll just wait here for a minute. And I know my legs will work in a moment. And eventually my legs work, and I pulled myself up, and I sat on the desk, and I finished teaching, because I'm concerned. These people have paid to be there. So my concern is that they get top dollar in what they're doing. And so I finished teaching, and then I very carefully go and get a cup of coffee. And then I very carefully drive all the way back to Scotland over 2 days where I lived. And I go and say to my wife at this point, so I'm now married, and I say to her, look, this is what's happened. And she says, well, you better go and see the doctor. So I go and see my doctor. He goes, oh, you're a bit tired. He says, he looked at a few notes, and he says, I'll give you some diazepam to calm yourself down. I said, I don't need diazepam, mate. I said, I want to know why I can't remember who I am. Well, my legs don't work. That diazepam doesn't help with that. And so I go home, and I spend most of the following day and night researching the kind of things I've been experiencing. And this begins to take me down all sorts of roads, from what you might call the grounded here and now, and the quite scary about, tumours and strokes and degenerative spine problems. At the opposite end, I'm now looking at something about Kundalini and spiritual awakening and spiritual awareness. And I'm actually beginning to cross-match some of these symptoms. And I'm going, that's really, really interesting, because actually, although I've not acknowledged it, I've also had a bit of that going on, about a bit of these coloured lights in my head, hypersensitivity in my body, often shutting my eyes, seeing flowing colours. And I'm thinking, so there's a bit more going on here. So I basically write a list of, this is the things that I need. And I showed it to my wife, and she laughed, and she says, well, a hospital's not going to give you that. You can't just phone up and ask them. I said, that's what I need. That's what I need to check. And I tried going back, speaking to my doctor, and I have an argument with my doctor about this. And I get banned from the surgery from being a combative patient for someone who disagrees with his doctor. And I'm trying to talk to my doctor as though, I'm the customer, and you're providing me with a service. You don't tell me that, you don't assume you know everything about me and my body and my life. You just got a few notes, mate. But we need to discussion. He doesn't want to discuss this. He's just going to tell me this and that and the next thing. And he's got some boxes to tick. And I thought, I've had enough of this. So I began to explore how I would sort this out myself. And at the same time this happened, I realized I was developing some kind of sensitivity. And this is the first time that I knew that what was going on was, let's call it, not mainstream normal. And in the house that I lived in, it was a former farmhouse, and it had a blacksmith's cottage next to it. And we were developing it as a so I could do training there. I ran the business from there, and we had a small amount of ground and a stream. I was gradually working away, and I was exploring permaculture principles and forest gardening. I had an interest of that. And where I slept upstairs, we had skylights in the house. And I wake up one night and I have this sensation that my skin's got this burning, crawling sensation. And it woke me up. It was enough that I couldn't sleep properly. And I thought, well, that's a bit interesting. That's a nervous system thing, is what the brain says. And the following night happens again. The following night happens again. The following night happens again. And for those who live in Scotland, if you're listening from Scotland, this is quite rare, because this means we got a clear sky, which is quite amusing in Scotland, having a clear sky. And I suddenly realised this sensation is gradually changing time each night. And I'm sitting out in the garden with a cup of tea going, okay, so I'm experiencing this, a gradually advancing time. First time it was midnight, then it's a few minutes after midnight, then it's 1 a.m., then it's 1:30 a.m. And I'm thinking, so what's changing? What changes in the environment? And I go, okay, it must be something to do with the sky. And so the next night, I sit in bed and I just wait to see what happens. And what I realised was it was moonlight. And each night, the moon is rising later, and the moonlight was coming through the skylight, and it was hitting the bed, and the moonlight was advancing across the bed. And when it touched my body, I could feel it burning. And I remember laughing, thinking, hey, I've become allergic to moonlight. This is really interesting. But this is a light frequency. And so I put some blinds over the skylight, and that sensation goes away. But I was developing a sensitivity. And fast forward this over a number of months, what I realized was I was developing sensitivity to electrical cabling and things like the mobile phone. And eventually I realized I was going to have to stop traveling for work. I couldn't tolerate being in planes and on trains and traveling on the motorway, anything at all like that, because I could literally feel a mobile phone signal go through me. And it was quite awful. It was like having a drill or a hot bullet going through you. And we ended up moving from the farmhouse, which was near some power lines. It was faced onto Invergordon Port. I realised it was the radar sweep from the ships in the port and the oil rigs. I was reacting to that. I was thinking, has this caused it? Sensitivity to, radar stroke X-ray. This is what I'm thinking about. And we had a little cottage a distance away in some woodland that we used to rent out. And I end up living back in the cottage, and then I'm reacting to the ring main in the house. We have to rip out the ring main and put armoured cabling in, and now I can sleep okay. So I'm now living a bit like a hermit in the woods, but having time to reflect upon all of this. And at this time, I'm now doing quite a lot of research, and I can tolerate it. I do a little bit of research on the internet. I can't use a router. I have to have it plugged in through what we call Ethernet. And I come across a couple called Stephen and Linda Kane, who run the School of Energy Awareness. And this is Andrena, where the energy testing and the energy eggs, that's where this stuff comes in.
It's like signal problem, eh?
That was right, yeah. So I basically book an appointment with them, and they did this amazingly sort of deep review of the physical, emotional, energetic symptoms. Biggest report I've ever had on anything in my life. They set me up with going to see a Russian specialist who's working in private practice to have all sorts of hair, saliva, blood, nail clippings, the whole lot. She's looking at the chemical balance in the body. And at this point in time, they give me some Tai Chi type exercises to do that change your energy. And for about 8 weeks, I looked at this report and thought, some of this is bollocks. It's literally what went through my head. How does moving my body change my energy? And then one day I thought, well, hang on, you paid for this, you may as well do it. So I start doing these various Tai Chi type exercises, and after about a week, I'm feeling a bit better. So I carry on doing them, and I feel a bit better, and then I feel better, well enough to actually go back to work, because I've got this company and I'm paying a manager, and I'm not earning any money for 18, 20 months. I did not earn a penny. The company exists, the work is being done, the staff are being paid. I'm paying this manager to run the company, but I, Mark, don't earn a single penny. My wife's taking the strain for everything. So my first day back at work, I'm now in Edinburgh. I'm teaching snow sport instructors, outdoor first aid, and normally a tutor would, share personal stuff with the group. But I said, look, just go careful with me. joke, because this is my first day back at work. If I'm a bit slow, all right, that will be why. Morning break, one of the tutors comes up, one of the instructors, the snowball instructor, she gives me a leaflet, and it says KCR therapy on the top. And part of me went, oh, not another modality. And another part, no, look at this. I look at it, she explains.
Signal's breaking up here at the minute. It's not coming through.
Okay, just let me know if you've got that back.
Yeah.
I got it. I can hear it.
Is that okay there, Jeff? Yeah?
Yeah.
Right.
So essentially, she gives me this leaflet and she says, let me give you a taster session. And I was a bit tentative about getting involved in another modality because I knew my system was very, very sensitive. I knew that cranial sacral therapy was working well. I knew that various light touch therapies, Bowen therapy that comes from Australia was working really, really well at this point. These are the things I've discovered that work well for me on my system, on the nervous system. They calm things down a lot. They release off the aches and pains in the body. And I say, who's created this? And she went, oh, it's a Scottish physio. He was in the States, but he's now back in Glasgow. I said, well, I need to go and see him. And effectively, I got hold of this guy called Hugh Gilbert, and Hugh has passed away now. So we're going back about 8-9 years now. And I got hold of Hugh, and I arranged to go and see him, and I spent a whole afternoon with him at his house. And I told him the story as I'm telling this now on the radio and on YouTube, on the platforms. And he looked at me and said, how long were you dead? And I said, what do you mean? He says, how long were you dead? And I said, I wasn't dead. He says, when you were out of your body, seeing yourself on the road, you were dead, you were passing. And I'm going like, whoa. And I said, seriously? And he went, yeah. He says, so how long? And I went, well, quite a few minutes. He says, so you decided to come back? And I went, well, I guess so. He says, that's when you woke up on the road and thought the bed was hard, wasn't it? He says, so you were going and you came back. Why did you come back? And I said, well, I thought about my kids. I said, and I felt a bit sad. I said, and then I thought there was something I was supposed to do. And it wasn't necessarily, anything fantastic, like, start a religion or anything like that. But it was like, I just hadn't done it. And he said, right, that's why we're sitting in the room. And he says to me, he was holding my hands at the time. And he said, what was the last thing you were doing before you went over the handlebars of the bike? And I went like, yeah, like being scared, man. And he went, no, seriously, what was your body doing? And I went, oh, I was holding the handlebars quite tight. And he says, just let me hold 2 points on your hands. And my hands began to go up into this claw-like shape. And I was like, whoa, what's going on here? And he laughed and he said, well, unfortunately, in medieval times, they'd have said you were possessed. He says, and you'd have found yourself in water or on a stake or something like that. He says, what's actually going on, something called fascia in your arm has a memory of trying to control the bike crash. And he says, we're releasing it. Because if we don't, he says, by the time you're 60, mate, he says, you're going to have a doctor telling you you've got rheumatoid arthritis or Dupuytren's contracture, and your hands are going to be like claws. And he began to release. And in that moment, I flashed back into going over the handlebars of the bike. When he finished working on me, I said, hey, look, could I learn how to do this? And he went, absolutely. And that was the start of what I now do and how I met Andrena at the show in Somerset about 9 years after this man had worked on my hands and sorted all of this out. So Andrena, okay, I'll let that go back to yourself and Jeff for a moment. And so you can think of any questions you maybe want to ask on that.
Yeah, fascinating, Mark. Gosh, what a journey you've been on. But the last bit, the signal was coming and going, and Jeff was coming on and off. And so, can you just backtrack that you mentioned you saw somebody and he held your hands, and then he connected to when you went off the bike, and he picked up on the trauma or a past life thing. So, can you just go back on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, this is a really amazing physiotherapist, and his name was Hugh Gilbert. And say Hugh passed away a few years ago now, but essentially Hugh had his own journey through life. He started as a football physio in the late 60s in Glasgow, been born in the Gorbals, or born very close to that, very rough area of Glasgow. He'd had quite a tough upbringing, but he went into this football physio, and he had what you call, a normal business. He's good at what he did, and eventually he went to the United States and was, I think he was Canada, United States. It was Canada, and effectively he began to develop various sort of protocols and procedures that were getting very, very good results. So he had this gift, he had this talent, and he has his own story. He's written about that in a book called Free the Unicorn, which is Hugh's story. And effectively, he became very well known for getting top dollar results for least amount of inputs. And because it's a kind of insurance-based system in the United States and Canada, they want to get people back at work, but not just crawling in the door with aches and pains, like bouncing through the door ready to go. And Hugh had realized that if you took some mainstream mobilizations and stretches and you did them in a certain order, you got the maximum result. And he had it sort of evaluated, reviewed. It was what is known as a gold standard. In other words, it would take X number of sessions with Hugh versus Y number of sessions of normal physio, or Z number of sessions with a chiropractor and osteopath. And he developed this protocol, and then he retired and he came back to Scotland. And his partner, Jane, at the time had said, look, you can't just park this up. You really ought to do something with it. So he effectively designed a protocol and realized that you didn't have to be a physio or an osteopath with all this training. If you just followed the protocol, you could follow the mobilizations and stretches with guidance, and that he could train an ordinary person to get some really outstanding results. So he began to develop it and run these courses. And this is how the snow sports instructor, who was also a massage therapist, she was a Polish lady, she'd actually been, as part of her massage training, she'd gone on one of his courses. That's how I then come by the leaflet. So looking back now, we would say these are the magnetic pushes and pulls of the law of attraction. This is how spirit and soul works in opening doorways and bringing things to your attention, but you have to notice it. Right, I just think Jeff, can you still hear me at all?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Yeah, it was just at a slight buffer there. So it's through observing the synchronicity, observing the use of free will, that you have to see these opportunities and go, is this telling me to not do something? Is this telling me to do something? There's clearly something. I've had my attention drawn to something. And I just knew that having a short session with the massage therapist wasn't the right thing. I knew I needed to go and see this guy that had created this modality. And so I'm in Hugh's house, and we'd had the discussion about, well, how long you've been dead, which I'd never thought about it in that perspective whatsoever. I'm going and came back. And so it's when Hugh basically had taken hold of my hands. What he was doing was, a form of myofascial release. This wasn't actually a KCR move. He just held my hands, but by holding them, he triggered the memory in the fascia in the arms. And that's how they then undid. And because as they were undoing, I flashed back to hanging onto the bike, going over the handlebars of the bike, and it's released. And that's when I say to him, well, could I learn how to do this? Like, do you have to be a doctor, a physio? Do you have to do like 6 years training? And he's going, no, come along and you start at KCR level 1. And I did all the different levels, and I went and did the accreditation. Hugh used to do a personal accreditation, and I did that accreditation with him. And he said to me, as I was doing this, he says, you're good at doing this. He says, you really need to go and explore the world of fascia, okay, myofascial release, all the different names that it's given around the world. You need to go and explore that. And that's what I've done. And I went from doing the KCR therapy, I had the mobilizations and stretches, and that moved me on to doing myofascial release, which I did in the UK with an amazing lady called Jan Arthur. Yeah, this is me actually practicing the myofascial release on my dog Dillon. This is my therapy dog, Dillon. And when I say therapy dog, he was a therapy for me, and he now works with me with my clients. So I've got my hands above and below, and I'm actually working on his diaphragm there. So by light touch and holding down, because he's always pulling on his lead and he likes to chase squirrels and pheasants and things like that, he gets a bit tight around there. So I'm just holding that area, and I'm allowing the fascia to then release. It wants to do what it wants to do, and I'm following the fascia with my hands. And one of the things I learned from Hugh was we looked at the law of attraction in a much more detailed way than perhaps many people have experienced it, reading The Secret or Ask and It's Given, all the different things that's known, cosmic ordering. And Hugh had said, look, we've all got focus plus intention, and we were doing it in the context of working on a client and running a business. He says, we've all got focus plus intention, but not an awful lot of people deal with resistance. So focus plus intention minus resistance. You're not allowed to have something. You're not good enough to have something. And again, I'm now thinking about my childhood upbringing. And he then says, then you have to then allow, even when you deal with the resistance, you still have to allow. So it was focus plus intention minus resistance plus allowing. He says that's what it's really all about. And unless you work your way through all of that, and some of that is personal process work, it's you understanding more about you. And the more you understand about you, the more you understand about other people. He says, and if you use that information to manipulate people, that's not good. That's marketing, as we experience advertising, political stuff. But if you do it in the interest of the client, then that is being of service. And so I'm thinking this guy is doing more than showing us 20 mobilizations and stretches. And we go a little bit into, he looked at Hawaiian energy medicine, what the kahunas do. There were some elements of that, some breath work, and all of that combines into what goes into the modality. And there are case therapists in Australia and Canada, quite a lot in Scotland, okay, and it's a really outstanding modality, especially for people who are wanting to maybe thinking of working in these areas but aren't quite sure where to start, or haven't got huge amounts of money, or thinking I can't afford to do 3 years of whatever. I want to get myself underway, but I want to be able to make a difference. And so there was a lot more to the KCR therapy than just the mobilizations and stretches. And along the way, I'd come across, Hugh had described fascia in detail, and in my sort of fascia training and research, fascia is pub quiz facts. If you're not aware of this, it's the largest physical organ in the body. There's 64,000 miles of it, and when you see it with the eye, when I'd seen events in the police and the army where people were injured or worse, and you could see inside the body, you could see this silver sheet when you go past a butcher's shop or the butcher's counter in the supermarket. Meat often has this silvery sheen to it, and that silvery sheen is fascia. Okay, and to the naked eye, it looks like cling film. You look at it under a microscope, electron microscope, you see it's collagen fiber tubes. You look at it really closely, you see the tubes are hollow. They're made of collagen, and it's got crystalline water in it, and it has nutrients and toxins, but really importantly, it has photons and biophotons of light. And these photons and biophotons of light are vibrating.
Signal breaking up again.
Yeah, they're exiting and leaving all of the time. And this is how memory gets stuck in tissue in the body, because light contains data. Light holds information. That's why the fiber optic cable brings information to your house for the internet. And so light holds information. And so the light inside the fascia in the body holds all sorts of information, not just what you've experienced. It holds information from your ancestors. It holds information from previous personalities. In other words, the different body that's occupied the space that you think you occupy. And so you've got the energy system that's just carrying on forward. It's always there. The physical body changes inside it. We might refer to that as a past life for some people. I call it a previous personality, because I'm unique. I've never been here before myself, personally. Mark was born in 1963 in Devon, and he's done some of the things he's done, and I've explained some of the things I've done and things that happened to me. Those things are unique to me. But they are parallel, they're mirror images of what have happened to a previous personality. And I began to see the connections. And as I began to work on people with fascia work, I started off with, you got a painful hip, you got a painful ankle. And then I began to realize that if I looked very carefully, I began to see impressions of shapes and images. And there would be, well, there's a lump of metal sticking out of that. Or there's a memory in this hand of, holding a trigger or holding an agricultural implement. And I would say to the person, would you mind? Could you just put down the rifle, put down the axe? Could you let go of the fishing net? And what would happen is they spontaneously unwind, and they would go, what's happening? And I would say, oh, don't worry. You had an ancestor who held a fishing net a bit too tight. You had a previous personality. And if you don't like previous personality, it's a sub-personality. I really don't mind what you go with. But the more I worked on people, the more I began to see this. And I'm thinking, well, okay, how is this happening? And essentially, as you work on people, the mobilizations, the stretches, the energy work, releasing the fascia, like photons leave, like photons hold data, and you're then picking up that information through the pineal gland, through the energy system, through the chakras. The more I worked on people, the more I realized that I was actually seeing that kind of...
I don't know if you can hear me, Mark, but you
Yeah.
are you're coming in and out, and I'm
Yeah.
missing so much. And then
Okay.
Jeff disappears, and then I disappear. So I'm not quite sure what's going on in the great scheme of things. Because
Okay.
yeah, so
I can hear him loud
just
and clear.
wondering, because obviously this is what is really fascinating. How you're working, with the sub-personalities and doing the reversal and all that, which I know a few of us that have worked with you have just been amazed of different things that have come up, birth trauma and all sorts of things. So so because you keep disappearing in and out, I'm just wondering if, like, we stop the broadcast now because we've been going for an hour.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering if we can get you back another time and maybe somewhere else. It's funny because people are in Australia telling me it's fine. Well, pass. I don't know what to say.
Maybe I've just got a very loud voice from when I was in the army. I'm just shouting.
I don't know why are you disappearing, Jeff? Are you coming on and off?
No, we're going live out of the control unit, which is here in the studio. So we're going live and it's going to all the different sites. So if you like, Andrena, you can actually go onto your browser and just say, what's my speed? And it'll tell you how much bandwidth you're coming through. So you might just at the moment, both you guys are in technically issues here. But while you're doing that,
just give me a
Andrena,
second, folks.
well, you do that, and Mark could continue on with the fact that you're now going to set up a school, a college of psychic studies. Yeah. Yeah. Andrena, just
it's taken a long time to find my speed.
Well, then you've got so you've got a bandwidth issue where you are in the UK. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, all right. Well, it's still trying to find my speed, which in symbolic, I've been ill for weeks with a virus of some sort. I am better, but I am still. There's room for more improvement. Put it that way.
Yeah.
I've got some different things. Oh well, that's good. It's in Australia. It must be me. It's always.
I mean, just sort of going back. So, if I was going to summarise what I do is, so along the way, I've got all this, this military police background. It's very, very structured, very protocol oriented. But one of the things that it was important in all the roles I did in those organisations, and certainly at the special school and certainly Red Cross, was its interactions with people, and it was beginning to observe people's actions, reactions, lack of reaction sometimes. And whilst I had this 20 months off work, being electrosensitive, one of the things that occurred there was I actually managed to find, I saw this Russian specialist, and I did manage to get to see an NHS GP who was far more sympathetic to what was going on. Because essentially I've got people saying to me, Mr. Harris, electrosensitivity is a mental health problem.
Right. He's gone off. Over there in Wales.
I tell you what, I find it really fascinating, only from the fact that I've worked with Mark and so have my friends, and some of the traumas that I've been through, that when I had my first son, we both nearly lost our lives. It was just touch and go. And we've been talking about rites of passage. Oh my God, that brought up so much grief for me, that on an energy level, I realized that I hadn't given them a rites of passage through the birth canal. So that took me off on another adventure of it's amazing how these things come up in timing. And the sadness I had for weeks about this was mega. And I know I said to Mark I would really like some help to clear the trauma of that, especially for my children, you know, energetically. And that was really powerful when we were doing that work, and sort of reversing the situation. So, and also, I know Mark has picked up, you know, you've got the gift of putting your, you know, seeing something that's going on here and seeing a knife or sword or something in, and you've been able to release that trauma and then reverse it excuse me, back before. So I just find that
There you go, Mark. You might come back.
Yeah. I mean, well, at the end of the day, I'm just going to go back very briefly to some of the treatments that I went through during the 20 months I was off work. And so there was electrosensitivity, there was a diagnosis of systemic candida, so candida outside the gut, there's candida in the brain, there's candida in all sorts, in the heart and the lungs. Tick-borne diseases that I'd carried, my immune system had contained, biggest one being Lyme's disease here in the UK. That was in the brainstem, that was in the heart. And so I'm having treatments, and the mainstream medical practices were finding it hard to get round. But I found this very sympathetic GP, and he agreed. He says, no, this isn't just all physical. I do get that there's something going on here. I do appreciate you've got all these private results. I can't do anything with them, but I will make a record. And he asked me to go and see a special psychotherapist, and I was quite happy to go and do that. We're talking about my life in general. And the upshot was this guy saying to me, you obviously have coped with all of these things incredibly well. And I talked about the split behavior. When I crashed the bike, I could look after me, I could analyze what was going on. He says, a lot of this sounds like something called dissociation. And I went, well, I get that. And he says, but we just need to explore it a bit more. So we actually spent 2 days writing down what you call a trauma history, and it was physical and emotional. And I realized there was stuff going right back to pre-birth. So, for example, my mother literally a day before I was born goes for a walk on the snow and ice in the UK, and she slips and falls straight down on her sit bones. And I'm thinking, geez, would have been almost in the locked in head down position, ready to get born. And I'm thinking, wow, that's a real shock to go through a baby about to be born. I wonder how my nervous system, I wonder how my fascia, and and at this point I'm working with meridians and chakras and the energy system. I'm thinking, I wonder how that registers all that. And I thought, I'm always banging my head, and I'm always banging the top of my head. I used to say to my wife, do you know how difficult it is to bang the top of your head on a repeated basis? And I realized, I said, this is like my energy system, my consciousness has this memory of a blow to the head, and I just keep repeating it. So clearly I need to do something about this. And so effectively I become a guinea pig in a form of rapid eye movement desensitization technique. They call it EMDR. And I have to wear these flashing glasses with and you see all sorts of mandalas and shapes. But because of part of the treatment, it was an experiment, I'm hooked up to all sorts of stress monitors. And this is where we start getting some really strange things in a mainstream setting. And so what would happen is they'd say, can you talk about something, talk about your bike crash, talk about stuff in the army and the police. I'd talk about it for 20 minutes. And then on a wall was a screen, and there were 2 lines across it. And this guy, he was absolutely amazing. I'm so glad. There were certain key people. There's Hugh Gilbert, this guy called Peter Carr up in Scotland. And he looked at that and he says, right, Mark, he says, those 2 lines up there are your 2 brain hemispheres. He says, and you might notice that they're acting like 2 separate people. They're like a man and a woman who don't communicate. I said, well, I get that. And he says, and this is dissociation. And he leans across, he looks at me, he says, and if you were a shaman, you'd call that soul loss. And I was like, now I understand. We're now talking about the same thing from 2 different perspectives. I said, so what do we do? And he says, we've got to get those lines touching. He says, but when those lines touch, you'll experience emotion that you've kept bottled up, but this is why you've been able to do the jobs that you've done. I went, great. So there was about 12, 14 months of this, and lots and lots of progress. On the very last session, when they're basically, it's like, you're now a private sector patient. You're not in any serious life-threatening danger. He says to me, he says, you'd be really good at doing this as a therapist. You've got an amazing amount of insight about yourself and other people that you've developed over this time. And they're hooking me up to the monitors and all the rest of it. And you have to do a little bit of checking into your body, a bit of grounding, a bit of a meditation. My arms are heavy, my legs are heavy, you're in your body. And I suddenly experienced this huge explosion. And it was like I was sailing through the air. And I was like, whoa. And it was like I could see a pair of boots in the mandala, in the glasses. And this is pushing you into the right hemisphere of the brain. It's getting the left hemisphere to keep quiet so you can access the subconscious. And I see this pair of boots. And all I could think was, those boots look really old. You know, these boots look really, really old. And I could see like some blue trouser legs. Anyway, the guy running this, he comes across, says, are you okay? The monitors have gone off the scale, the heart rate, okay, the adrenal levels, they've all gone off the scale. The brainwave frequencies were all over the place. And he looked at me and he says, what happened? And I said, I was blown up. And he says, when did that happen in the army? We've not got that on the trot. I said, I was never blown up in the army. And he went, are you sure? Absolutely. I said, I was not blown up at any point and anywhere in my army service. I said, I never served in, you know, a full-on war zone or anything like that. There was nothing at all like that in my service. And he paused and he says, well, what do you think it is? And I looked at him and I said, my grandfather was blown up in World War I and ended up with a head injury. And he went, he says, kind of suspected that there may be some ancestral components to some of the things that we deal with. We'll have to put that in a little box because mainstream's not ready for that. But essentially, that was my first real insight, absolute tangible insight into ancestral trauma, that I'd actually experienced something. My body behaved as though it was happening to me, but this is in the fascia and the DNA and the energy system, the aura and the chakras of my grandfather. And of course, I've sat on his knee and he taught me how to count, all this kind of stuff. And in that sort of process, I've somehow taken his stuff on in some way, shape or form.
Family so constellations.
Yeah, sorry?
Family constellations, yeah?
Yeah, family constellations, exactly. And I've done family constellation work. I've been through all these processes. I've done so many things. I've been into dowsing. I did the year's diploma based upon the Barbara Brennan science healing. I explored so many versions of this. And little things have come up that I'd always had an open mind on. I wasn't gonna go, yeah, hey, this is a past life or whatever, but I was also not going to dismiss it. I used to describe myself, it is literally this 2-horse race. And it was this split brain hemisphere thing I'm looking on a screen and this description of soul loss that got me thinking about, well, this is what happens in my life, is when I'm thinking about the guy who put the sheet around my neck and I'm more worried about him than I am worried about me. That's the left part of my brain. That's the masculine part of me. And it's structured and it's organized and it understands protocols. But when you move across into the hemisphere of the brain and you open the gateway to the subconscious, where we ended up was that what I sort of realized, and I didn't read this anywhere, nobody taught me this on a course, it was just a series of realizations, which is what I was doing was brain hemisphere hopping. And it depended which brain hemisphere in was how I processed the information at a kind of, not at an intellectual level, but at an energetic level. And this led me to realizing when I was working on people that if they're in the left hemisphere of the brain, they would turn up and go, look, I've got a painful shoulder, I've got a painful neck. The trigger point therapy, whatever it was, and we could fix that. But I would get these impressions and sensations. I realized if I could help people get into the other brain hemisphere, when you're in the right brain hemisphere, that's behaving with no boundaries. There's no time, there's no distance, there's no spatial understanding. So in other words, when you're in the right hemisphere of your brain, you're hypersensitive, you're energy sensitive, you are able to access information that you wouldn't normally access. And it's behaving as though every event in your life is still going on. So you're being conceived, you're gestating, you're being born, and every event that has happened in your life is still going on. What I realized was, in a very shamanic way, I did a little bit of shamanic training, not a great big year-long course. I'd done various workshops. I just realized was that if we froze the event and went back to it, if we got you to reverse the event, if we got you to put the objects down, the fascia was behaving as though this was still going on. And when we did that, the fascia would release and the light photons begin to move round. The person gets a flashback or an insight. The energy field gets bigger. The chakra spins faster. And at that point, hormone levels change, blood and oxygen levels change. So that's basically how I work now. And the biggest thing I work with is the birth trauma, because most people, the aches and pains and the psychological things they have now and the energy disruption stuff, it's all birth stuff. And if you've been born with a cord round your neck, if you've had a forceps delivery, if you've had a cesarean delivery, the memory of that is in your fascia and in the memory of mum. And it's things like, I worked on people. I had someone, this is how this started. I had someone and I'm saying, she's got this back pain. And I'm saying, have you had an epidural? Have you had a spinal block? And she went, no. And I said, well, your spine's behaving as though you are, so we'll release it. And she said, I was born by cesarean and my mother had the spinal block. And I realized in that moment in time that the baby connected to mum via the umbilical cord is that the baby's fascia is behaving the same as the mother's fascia. So even though she's not had the spinal block, her body, her psychology, her nervous system, her energy system is better. Like I said, can you just imagine some needles coming out of your back? And the whole back releases and unwinds and went click, 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 click. And so if you're in the left brain hemisphere, Mark does about 10 or 12 different modalities or interventions. If you're in the right brain hemisphere, I do the same thing 12 different ways. Okay. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm just working with fascia and energy, but I've got 12 different ways of doing it. And I'll try and match it to the patient or the animal, to the dog or to the horse or whatever else, the cat that I'm actually working on. So I'm not sure how much of that you got, Andrena. Does that, just looking at the first situation there, was that okay for you, Jack?
Not a lot. I don't know what's happening because I've never had this problem here before.
Okay.
So I'm going to have to listen to the replay.
Okay.
I know from my own experience with you, because I had a lot of epidurals, because I think I mentioned I was going to have a natural childbirth. I was not going to have gas,
I remember that.
gas in hair. I was in labor for 23 hours and my son had stitches. I had stitches everywhere and oh God, what a carry on. Anyway, yeah, so clearing all the epidurals out the spine, we did a lot of that, excuse me, and so much more. And yeah, just amazing. So I really do, you know, they say when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And, you know, you came into mine and a few others' lives at the right time. And I know I took a friend when we were in Torquay. I met up with met you there in your clinic with a friend, and I know it helped her greatly. So yeah, so I'm just really fascinated and would like to understand more of you know, releasing memories and all sorts of things. So I realise we've gone on quite a bit, which is absolutely fine, because it's I think for people that want to know more about this, I mean, your details have come up on the screen. You will be doing, you have got some workshops booked. So yeah, fascinating. I just find it really amazing. And this is where we are now, to clear on a deep, deep level so that we can be of service to go forward to help more people that are struggling with different things. So awesome. Thank you very much for sharing all these wonderful things.
Yeah, that's fine. And it's just to let people know that, you know, I can work from a distance. When I say work from a distance, I can work from Skype and Zoom and FaceTime, and I can work from photographs. I prefer to have you know, a live interaction. I can work from photographs, so I can release stuff from photographs. And I've got a nice set of magnetic mats and red light therapy units and all sorts of stuff that will help release fascia and trauma. But it's best done sort of live. So if you're in Australia, I'm not in Australia. You know, don't think that you can't you know, access some of the things that I'm able to help you with. But at the same time, you'll have some very talented therapists in Australia. And I know you've got Steve Richards and holographic kinetics. If those who aren't aware of that, go and look it up. I met Steve. I did some work. Steve worked on me. It was part of my journey. I had some sessions with people he trained in the UK. He came to the UK. I met him. It quite fundamentally, although I haven't trained in the modality, it does influence what I do. You've got KCR therapists in Australia. You've got Bowen therapy. You have Emmett therapy, Rolfing. They're all the different names that this work is done. I won't be the only person that is working multimodal with this at the end of the day. And so I'm taking a little bit of this and a little bit of that and matching it to the client. And the best way to describe it is most modalities, the client presents to the practitioner, to the therapist, to the doctor, whatever, and the person they presented to does something to them. And what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to get people to do this themselves. So there's a whole list of self-help techniques about scanning your body, dropping inside, releasing stuff yourself, and it mimics, it copies many other modalities at the end of the day. But your bottom line is this, which is the more you allow the light you're looking for is inside you. Yes, it comes from outside, but the light you're looking for is inside you. It's these light photons inside. You know, an angel is a photon of light traveling at an angle that hits your pineal gland that gives you a message from God, from spirit, from the void, from great mystery. And that gives you information about what to do, where to go, what not to do. You know, spirit is saying, go here, don't go there, do this, don't do that. And that's how you begin to say, live the dream. You know, you dream the dream, then you live the dream. And effectively, the bigger your energy field becomes and the faster the chakras spin and the more you repair the damage and the foreign energy that accumulated in it. You know, foreign energies are belief systems, they're behaviors, but they're also literally lumps of consciousness from times and places, some of which you have no knowledge of. You don't even know that they're there. And so you think you experience life in this way. You think you attract certain things in certain ways. And that's a lump of somebody else's energy. You know, me going to Scotland, for example, that was my grandmother's energy that took me there because she always wanted to go back and live there and she never did. I end up fulfilling my ancestors' wish or dream, which is not right, it's not wrong, but that wasn't necessarily what was in my best interest. I learned a lot along the way. I met some great people. I obviously met Hugh Gilbert. So everything kind of happens for a purpose. But ultimately, the more you expand the energy system, the more damage you sort out in the chakras, the more foreign energies you get rid of. Some people call it cords. That's kind of what I call first aid level. Dealing with stuff, we can send energy back. We can actually hoover it out. We can extract it in different ways. It changes posture. Because it changes posture, it changes energy flow. Because it changes energy flow, it changes what you become aware of. It's not knowledge, left brain, it's wisdom, old-fashioned word for awareness, that's right brain. And you suddenly begin to see the synchronicities and the interconnections, and you get ideas about how to do stuff, how not to do stuff. And you find yourself going to spirit places and connecting to the spirit. And it's not an intellectual one, oh, let's go to Stonehenge because it's a solstice. A spirit, I've got a waterfall in my garden that's a spirit energy for me, which I'll go and sit and meditate at, and I can feel my energy field expanding. And then when I've got a problem to solve for a client, that's where I get the solution from. You know, I've interacted with something in nature that's just made the energy field bigger. The energy field is connected to awareness. I'll suddenly think, oh, we've not tried that. Or I'll pick up a book and it falls open on a page. And I'll go, well, that's interesting. And that happened this morning. I have a client I'm dealing with at the moment. There's some various issues around Kundalini flow. And I just pick up my massive, great big biology of Kundalini book, which I hardly ever look at. And it falls open on a page about magnesium. And I'm reading this and going, that's exactly what's going on for my client. So we need to be looking at magnesium supplementation to deal with this. That's a here and now example of, you know, awareness, spirit energy, and then how working with that spirit energy. So I work with the animal medicine cards and sacred pathway cards because it's oral traditional information that's been passed on.
Okay, let's you can talk for a whole season. No odds of much. Hey, listen, brother, it's been a fantastic thing. I think I've been really, like everybody else, has been really ingrained with the storytelling, and it's a great journey that you've expressed. And it's almost tells me that you have a love affair for seeking knowledge and searching for that knowledge, because you're articulating it extremely well for anyone who comes left brain, comes from that left brain concept, you're giving them an explanation and an understanding of it because you've actually gone and done the journey. Because it seems like you have an addiction to seeking all that knowledge, and then you're trying to put it into simple terms to explain it. Whereas Steve, who we've had on the show, and we've actually seen him operate. I'm talking about Steve Richards here with the holographic kinetics. He's just so simple, matter of fact, boom, boom, end of story. He gets out of the way. He just allows spirit to work through him and heal the patient and go back through the timelines and bring it all into the now. Different. You guys are different. Different guys doing a similar job in the sense of you've seen the person healed, and and I take my hat off to you, Mark. You know, you've got a lovely spot up there in the Brecons there. I mean, the army spends a lot of time up there teaching them.
Oh, I know.
So when you look at your journey and you can see that the physicality of what you've done in the first part of your life, and now you're undertaking it in the second part of your life, where you're doing your own journey here and you're teaching yourself, and then you're taking the time out to explain and teach others. Fantastic, mate. I really appreciate you coming on today. Understand the internet situation both in Wales there and down in Devon. It's life communication, but you've got your message across. It's streamed all through the whole 1 hour and 25 minutes without any interruptions. It's been fantastic. And when you did go off, Andrena and I carried on. So, and when Andrena dropped off, you carried on. Yeah. So you can talk underwater, Mark. So it's
that's fantastic. Right. Yeah. I was just about to say maybe the internet's better in New South Wales than it is in South Wales, Old South Wales.
Definitely.
Anyway, so I take my hat off to you and really appreciate you coming on board today and explaining what you are. I have put up during the course of the show your website, and I'll just do it before we go, so that people can realise that they can touch base with you and do it online. There he is. He's gone. Would you believe it? Spirit's taking him out.
Bizarre. Anyway, so all my, so much knowledge and sharing. It's just, I just love people sharing their stories and their wisdom and how they're walking their talk and helping people be of service. So so I'm going to have to listen to the replay, but I'm, like I said, I have worked with Mark and I'm excellent. So we've got 2 more crises coming up here.
There was another little glitch at this end here, basically. So okay, so I'll let Jeff really close down the process.
Rightio. Thanks, folks. Next week,
Michael Lamb.
Another one straight out of the box. Mark, we can put you in the red corner. We can put Michael in the other corner. I don't know who's going to stop for breath. I'll tell you. So Michael, extremely esoterical fellow who, if you want to talk about the Kabbalah. If you want to talk about esoterical science, the gods, the goddesses, the archetypes, the animus, the anima. You want to talk about astrology, you're talking about astronomy. I mean, you want to talk about pyramids, this guy, his brain just goes
right,
and he shuffles it through, and then he out he comes. So that's next week. So next week you're Michael Lamb.
Next week.
So
thank you, Mark. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. So
then. Well.
I'm just